Reticulated pythons are awesome, but they get way too big. But they don't get way too big sometimes. Reticulated pythons are beautiful. Most snakes in the world, and I'm talking all reticulated pythons here, but most snakes in the world are camouflaged to look like their environment, and retics are no different. But with a lot of snakes, their environment is like dirt, mud, dead leaves, and so you get brown and black. And so if you're breeding color mutations into that and everything, you're always trying to overcome this natural brown and black wild cryptic coloration. But reticulated pythons are set up to look like dappled sunlight coming through a jungle canopy. So they have vibrant yellows, intense deep blacks, gorgeous rainbow iridescence when the light hits them just right, and pops of bright white called side rosettes. One of the prettiest snakes on its own on the planet. So from a pet keeping standpoint, retics are hardy. They're very forgiving to keeper error when it comes to things like temperature, humidity, food frequencies and sizes. They can kind of take it all in stride. In general, they get sick far less than other snake species, especially tropical ones. And they have a great food response, which I think a lot of people find intimidating in the beginning, but the second you get to know your snake just a little bit and you can see his different modes, that's the best thing ever because they never miss a meal. And finally, reticulated pythons are so fun to interact with. They see their world much the same as we do. So they identify things with smell, like when you walk into a bakery, hi buddy, yes. They're very visually oriented. So if you get up and on their eyes, you can see them looking around, looking you in the eye, looking all around to see what else is there. And just like your eyeballs are the windows to your soul, the reticulated python is oriented the same way, and so it really makes them easy to connect with. They're also being adaptable, highly intelligent in the way that we think of domesticated animals being intelligent. That is, they're trainable, they look for routines, they can adapt to those things, and it makes them so fun to communicate and interact with as you learn more about animal communication as a person. For these reasons and many more, reticulated pythons outside of their size might be one of the best pet reptiles that you could possibly get. And if you don't believe me, check out these videos from my buddy Clint. Staring down death by exposure, starvation, and thirst for millennia builds a rare kind of character. And character like that demands respect in any shape and size. That's an actual excerpt from our Dwarf and Superdwarf Reticulated Python Care Guide. This is pretty cool, guys. A collectible care guide. It's actually fully illustrated and has a ton of great information. If you want to learn more about not only what makes these Dwarf and Superdwarf, but also how to keep them and get the most out of your interaction with your little buddy. So basically, and as was stated in that care guide, how these came to be is not some kind of genetic defect or mutation like a lot of the dwarf domestic animals that we see. Instead, it's referring to a mechanism called insular dwarfism, where these guys come from a very small, very rare population that's super hard to get to on a select tiny group of islands out in the middle of the South Pacific. And by taking the genetics of the animals there, we can actually selectively breed these guys down in size to create all of those awesome traits that you love about reticulated pythons in a size that works for you. Now, if it was a genetic mutation like albinism or something, we could simply breed and produce more to meet that demand in the market. However, because it's coming from a naturally occurring wild race of these animals, which by the way, were imported in relatively small numbers and only until 2015 when it stopped, the stem of the genetics of those pure dwarf and superdwarf retics has become exceptionally rare, and as far as we know, they'll never be able to be imported again. So reticulated pythons are awesome, and dwarf and superdwarf retics are absolutely a thing from nature. What this allows us to do is take kind of the best traits of both worlds and blend them together as an art an expression of trying to create the perfect animal for you, which is a super exciting prospect, except when it's not. Listen up, because if you get this part wrong, it might just be one of the literal biggest mistakes of your life and put you in a really awkward situation. So just like our Patreon supporters over here, you're gonna wanna make sure that you're getting your animal from a breeder who is intentionally and artistically selectively breeding these down in size. There's so many ways that you can go wrong when you're crossing one of the largest snakes in the planet to a super tiny, manageable, awesome snake that if not done correctly or not done well or not done long enough, you can end up with a snake that will never be done getting long enough, if you know what I mean. Now, when I say that breeding Superdwarf reticulated pythons isn't art, I mean this isn't art. I think of it as kind of like bonsai, where you take a full-size tree through careful pruning over many years, you're able to achieve amazing results. Now, we're not just cutting pieces off of a snake to make it smaller. Obviously, the pruning of dwarf and superdwarf breeding happens in generational time. And these guys really weren't even defined and discovered scientifically, officially, until I think it was 2004. So this is relatively new. Imagine if you could go back in time to the earliest form of bonsai training and watch those baby trees start to grow. Nowadays, we can look back and there are trees that are literally hundreds and hundreds of years old that we can take all this inspiration from. And the people who are getting into breeding dwarf and superdwarf retics at this point, right now, are the artists who get to literally shape the future of keeping what might be the best pet reptile on the planet. And now it's time for our blooper of the week, brought to you by Ship Your Reptiles. And now, like two versions of this sentence. And now it's time for our blooper of the week. Blooper of the week. All right, can't do it. And now it's time for our blooper of the week, brought to you by Ship Your Reptiles. Boom, there it is. Drop mic. Whoops.